on the air with me, so let's just verify that real quickly. And that's you. You're on the air. Hello.
Hello, Diane. How you doing?
Good. Todd.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you so much. My next interview for the Political Candidate Interview Series, I have interviewed 54 candidates for office just in this primary season, including all the major U.S. Senate candidates and gubernatorial candidates. Kind of an exciting thing. Of course, as always, my role when it comes to these interviews is to take off any commentary hat and put on my objective journalist hat so that I can let the candidates themselves speak to the issues so that you, the voters, can decide. And without further ado, welcome, Todd, to the program. Great you could be with us.
Well, Diane, it's a pleasure to join you and your wonderful audience.
So tell me a little bit, Todd Akin, now you're currently the U.S. Congressman from what was District 2.
That's correct.
Might still be, I'm not sure, they relined all that, but now running for the office of U.S. Senate. And why is it, Todd, that you've chosen to run for the office of U.S. Senate?
Well, you know, we have passed so many bills in the House, they go to the Senate, everything dies in the Senate, and it's getting frustrating, and you put that together with the fact we haven't had a budget in over 1,000 days, and the tremendously liberal direction that the Senate is, and it just seems like the country is about to die under the weight of taxes, and particularly just out-of-control bureaucrats that are just besieging various business people. Put that all together, and I felt it was time to take back America, and I tried to take a look at what could I do. I had a safe enough congressional seat. I could have stayed in the seat. I didn't think that was the right thing to do. I felt like we had to take Claire McCaskill and put her on retirement. We needed a conservative in the Senate and not a rubber stamp for Obama.
And tell folks about yourself a little bit, Todd Akin. I know you're our, congressman for some of this listening here area right now, but tell people a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, what you've done in your life leading up to this point.
Oh, I'd be delighted to, Diane. I'm a little bit of a misfit in politics, too, in a way. I was educated as an engineer, and they usually don't let engineers into the political arena at all. I was an engineer, served as an officer in Army in the combat engineering, and then first main job, is not a government job, was with IBM. And there I had a chance to meet my wonderful wife. She was a systems engineer. I was a marketing rep. And I had lots of different accounts, mostly manufacturing and distribution. We sold them large computer systems. And so that was very interesting and helped give me the perspective of the importance of productivity. That was one of the key things we sold, was helping people to make something cheaper and to do a better job on it. And so I did that with IBM, and then the next job was entirely different. It was getting rid of the three-piece suits, and putting on blue jeans, hard hat, boots and all. I had 2,000 people working for me. I was in charge of maintenance in a steel mill. So that was still sort of a mechanical process industry, but just a different side of business. Did that for a number of years, and I got more and more concerned about what was going on in politics, ran for political office, and over the years I'm rated the most conservative congressman in the state of Missouri. And that's something, ever since Ronald Reagan, people say, oh, if you're going to run in the Republican Party, you always say you're a conservative. But, talk is cheap. It's a different thing to have a rating as one of the most conservative or the most conservative congressman in Missouri. And that comes by taking votes that sometimes aren't popular. My first vote as a congressman was on a bill to give more money and more power to the federal bureaucrats in the Department of Education. It was called No Child Left Behind. I'm the only congressman in the state of Missouri who voted no on that bill because I thought principially the principle of education is local control, not federal bureaucrats. And so that was one of those ones where it was the very first bill of President Bush. He's a great president, but I just didn't see eye to eye with him on that. And so I voted against the Republican leadership and the Republican president. And I had some other bills like Wall Street bailout. I had one of my very biggest contributors say, hey, you've got to vote for this thing. If you don't, we'll never talk to you again. But I took a good look at it, and I thought it wasn't a good bill. It didn't really solve the problem. We didn't have the money to do it. If we could fix the problem, it could have been done without spending that money. We didn't have to buy Goldman Sachs back at double book value and give all those executives nice golden parachutes. And so I voted no on that bill. So there's a couple of bills where there was, Republican leadership saying to do something. I just didn't do it. Same thing on the debt ceiling increase last summer and the 10% cut in defense. Those are all things that were, I'm just giving you examples of some Republicans ones where I was standing on principle and leading with courage. And so I really think that a proven record is better than talk and promises. And I think that's what I have to offer voters, is somebody who is a known conservative and has stuck to principle. And I think that's what I have to offer this election.
Okay, let's take a look at, the biggest issue, I think, for everyone in this cycle is the economy. It's been in a recession. It's slow growth out of it. It's stalled. It looks like it's stalling even more so right now. What do you believe is the federal government's role in economic development and in boosting the economy in this country? And if you were elected to the office of U.S. Senate, Todd Akin, what would you do that would help get this economy rolling again?
Well, Diane, that's a question that a lot of people are asking, and I don't really quite agree with the premise of the question, if that's all right. I think jobs are important. The economy is very important, but I think they're symptoms of something that's more severe and more troubling, and that is the federal government takeover of sector after sector and the excessive growth of the federal government and the loss of freedom. That's the real problem, and that problem is driving and making the economy sick and making it so there's no jobs. So unfortunately, it's not just jobs in the economy. And so I don't really think that that's the main thing. I think jobs in the economy are symptoms of a much overactive government, a socialistic mindset of the government taking everything over, 1/6 of the economy and Obamacare, taking over $1 trillion of student loans, and the government getting into managing the banking sector with Dodd-Frank, and wanting to manage the energy sector through the EPA and backdoor rules to give more taxing and regulatory authority to shut down all the carbon, coal, and natural gas and oil. So that's what I really think the problem is the government has become very socialistic and wanting to take everything over and shut sectors down. And I think jobs in the economy are just a reflection of that bigger problem. Is that okay to approach it that way in my answer, Diane?
Absolutely, it's okay to approach it. These are open-ended interviews for you to get the chance to say what's on your mind. And I'm wondering...
then finishing your last question, so what should the government do? Look, the government...
What should you do in the U.S. Senate? What, as a U.S. Senator, can you do? How can you vote? What can you support? If you believe that the problem stems, the jobs and the economy problem stems from just a broad government takeover of things, what do you believe can be done if you're elected U.S. Senator?
Right. And I think first thing I want to make the point is that the government does not create jobs. The government destroys jobs. And if we have the government not destroy jobs, the private sector will naturally create jobs. So what has to be done? One, the federal government has to be scaled back radically. We have to drop a tremendous amount of spending that we can't afford. We're burning more than $1 trillion a year in money that we don't have. That would mean if you wanted to balance the budget this year, what would you have to cut? Well, let's start cutting things. Let's say you cut all of defense. Would that balance the budget? No, not even close. So let's cut defense. Let's cut air traffic controllers, CIA, FBI, parks, prisons. Let's get rid of all the departments of energy, justice, commerce, education, and a bunch of others there. And then let's get rid of the White House and get rid of the Capitol building, the office buildings around it. Would you have a balanced budget then? Not quite. So that what I'm trying to show, Diane, is the significance of how much the government is involved in things it shouldn't be involved in. So that we're talking about a very, very serious economic problem. So one, the government has to be shrunk, and the second thing is the private sector has to get going. And how can the Senate affect the private sector? Quite simply, we have to basically shut down a lot of the extremely excessive red tape that's being imposed on businesses by a lot of these administrative agencies. They're no longer servants, they're tyrants. If you think about these agencies, our founders were wise enough to separate legislative, executive, and judicial authority. These agencies write their own laws, enforce their own laws, and if you don't like it, they're judge over their own laws. They're like little tyrants floating around just harassing people. And those have to be strictly, their activity has to be strictly curtailed. So that's one thing the Senate can do. The other thing the Senate can do is back off on taxes. If you do those two things and give some consistent policy, you'll see the private sector will start to revive. Right now, the private sector's got a drought going worse than the cornfields do.
Okay, and Todd Akin is my guest. He is Republican candidate for U.S. Senate on the August 7th primary ballot. And Todd, we do have a caller with a question.
Sure.
So let's go at it. Hello, you're on the air with Todd Akin. Hi.
Hi, Todd. I was watching TV, and I guess one question. Do you own a construction company?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear the...
Do you own a construction company, sir?
No, I don't own a construction company. I'm glad I don't right now. They're getting hammered like a lot of other people.
Okay, there was an ad on TV stating that you received $3.3 million to put a street into a subdivision and homes you're developing.
Oh, yeah, that's a lot of... that's a typical mudslinging that goes on before campaigns. Not true at all. My father has an old home place, an estate. There was an estate. It's about 8 acres, and the house that we grew up on when I was a kid. And he's 91. He's in the process of selling that land, and so somebody wanted to try to make the case that because a road is being improved somewhere nearby, that somehow I was doing something that was trying to feather my own nest. Not true. Really, the people that were neighbors in our area think that the expansion of the road makes more noise and traffic. They don't like it. They don't think it adds any value. There's been nothing proved that any value was added to my father's property. One, it's not mine. And two, the accusation that somehow that put money in my pocket is just totally false. It's just one of these things that people come up with because they don't have anything positive to say.
Okay. Thank you for your call. Okay, glad you got an opportunity to address that. That's good.
Well, you know, that brings up a sort of a larger question, and that is, what should a political candidate be offering to voters right now, particularly when America is in a unique time of crisis? This is unlike anything we've seen for at least 25 years. Perhaps you could say the Cold War days of Ronald Reagan might parallel it, but we are really in trouble as a nation. And so what should the people running for office offer? And I believe, Diane, that the public would like to hear from us something that's positive about here's where we are, here are the principles America's founded on, this is the direction we need to go, and this is the way we need to proceed to take our country back. And what I've heard is just, I don't know how many millions of dollars worth of negative ads on television. We have not done one negative ad, and in this primary, I don't believe we will do any negative ads, because our idea is what we should be talking about is here's who we are as a country, and this is what we should be doing to get ourselves out of the fix we're in.
Okay, and now let's look at another big issue, and that is obviously the U.S. Supreme Court ruled on the Affordable Care Act and basically upheld it under the guise it was a tax. And, you know, there's a few limitations as far as how the federal government would be able to penalize states in the issues of Medicaid. But by and large, the Affordable Care Act stands. What's your position on that? What would you do? And, you know, if you are a person who wants to repeal it, how would you replace it? What would you put in its stead if you were one that wanted to repeal it?
Well, you asked some good-sized questions, Diane. Let me break that into two pieces. First, how do we get rid of it? This thing is the worst bill I've ever seen. It will destroy our country's economy. It will result in rationing of health care and in lousy quality health care in America. It's a disaster. I would repeal every sentence of the bill. So first of all, let's get that clear. Second, How do you do it? Not so easy. Remember, the way this thing was passed, you had a large majority of Democrats in the House. You had 60 Democrat voters in the Senate, and probably one of the most liberal presidents that America's had, maybe since FDR. And together, they passed this thing. Even they struggled, choked on trying to get it passed, but jammed it down our throats on Easter Sunday. And so that was passed with that majority. So to repeal it, you need the same sort of thing. You've got to have a majority of Republicans in the House. You have to have 60 Republican senators with some backbone, and then you've got to have a president that's willing to sign a repeal. That's not likely we'll get that many Republican senators in this next election. I'm hoping to beat Claire McCaskill, but whether we'll have 60, I think that's unlikely. So now, what can you do now, because we don't have those 60? Well, because of the Roberts opinion, they did at least clearly say that this mandate is not a mandate, it's a tax. And that was what the case was going to pivot on all the way along, was the mandate for individuals to buy a product. Was that something that was mandating that you buy a product, or was that the government using its legitimate taxing power to coerce you? The Constitution or the law would allow you, for the government to use tax mechanisms to coerce you into buying something, but they can't make you buy something. So Roberts ruled that this thing was a tax, and so therefore it's constitutional. Now, what that means is that there is a process in the Senate called reconciliation, which does not require 60 votes to affect tax things. And so it means that we could probably defund Obamacare, not repeal it, but cut out the mechanisms that fund it in the Senate, and that would be my first step to trim it down to size, would be to defund it. So that's the first half of your question. Now, what do you do to replace it? A number of things, and some are fairly common Republican talking points, such as allowing people to buy health insurance across state lines, medical savings accounts. Those things are both good. And there are some other things as well. But I think more fundamentally, we need to take a look at what health insurance really is. And I think it should be a little bit more like, for instance, auto insurance. If you lose your job and you're working for a big company, you lose your health insurance. If your wife happens to have diabetes or something, you're really in trouble because you got a person that's uninsurable. And unless you get a job with another big company, you'll have a hard time getting health insurance. I don't think that's a good way to do it. I think instead what should happen is, if a company wants to provide you with health insurance, let them give you part of your paycheck in money so that you can buy your own health insurance, and people own their own policies. If you lose your job, you take your policy with you. In this regard, health insurance would be like auto insurance. You lose your job, you don't lose your auto insurance. You go to someplace else, you keep paying, it's your policy. And I think health insurance should work that way. So that's at least another step. That's something that you don't hear people talking about because it's a little harder to explain. But what that means is you get rid of the uninsurable problem, at least to a certain degree.
Okay, and some of the other issues that are big, immigration, that's another U.S. Supreme Court ruling. The borders, everybody's talked about the borders. They talked about the borders in 2006. They talked about the borders every election, and it seems like there's still nothing being done with the borders. And I'm speaking with Todd Akin, he is a Republican candidate for the office of U.S. Senate. If you were to be elected to the U.S. Senate, where would you be on immigration, and what have you done so far in Congress on the issues of immigration?
Well, we have passed a number of sort of border security bills and all, but the problem is the presidents have been unwilling to implement the bills, so that's frustrating. And a lot of focus goes to the border, per se. That's not where I would start with the issue. If I'm talking about immigration, I think we need to start with the idea that America was founded as a nation of law. As an engineer, I start with the principle of the thing. And we are a nation of laws. And we have laws regarding immigration, which our current president has chosen dishonestly and illegally to ignore. And so you start enforcing the law. If the law is a bad law, then get rid of it. Don't have a law in the books that you're not going to enforce. But if there is a law, it should be enforced. The way we have the system set up now, we effectively encourage illegals to come to the country because it's easier to come here illegally than it is to come here legally. And that's not a good thing. But we need to enforce our laws. Now, the Supreme Court decision was disastrous. It was ridiculous, and Scalia was completely justified in the vigor with which he rejected the thinking. How can it be that the state of Arizona cannot enforce federal law when the federal law officers are refusing to do their job? The federal government is not enforcing the law, so why can't Arizona at least enforce the federal law when it's a major problem for their state? I think it's outrageous. I think we should go to the aid of Arizona and try and help them against a ridiculous federal government that refuses to do their job. Now, if people think the laws should be changed, and I think they should be, in the area of immigration, we have a very awkward system. Change the law, but to ignore the law is just to make the problem worse.
Okay, and I'm speaking with Todd Akin. He's a candidate for U.S. Senate. He'll be on the Republican primary ballot on August 7th. One of the biggest issues facing us is the debt. The debt right now is $16 trillion plus. It's so hard to even follow where it's going, but it's way up there. The deficit over $1 trillion as far as the eye can see, and it seems to increase by the year. If you were elected, first of all, I guess a two-part question. What you've done in the House and what you do in the U.S. Senate in regards to getting this debt and getting this deficit under control.
Well, what I've done is refuse to vote for many of the bills that give the federal government the power to do things that are spending lots and lots of money. So that's what a conservative is in a way. Those of us who are conservatives, what do? We vote no on these massive spending bills and against spending money for things the federal government shouldn't be doing. But just to give you an example, as I mentioned before, first of all, you got a takeover of 1/6 of the federal economy with health care. That's a massive government takeover. The government does not run businesses well. Every bit of experience in all of history says government should be limited, particularly our federal government should be limited just as the Constitution specifies, and particularly limited to protecting our country, to upholding the law, and not to be getting involved in all kinds of different programs such as health care and taking over the health care system, but also they've decided to socialize the student loan program. Now, a couple of years ago, there were private lenders that students want to go to college. The private lenders would loan them money to go to college. But when the government continuously gets in there and gives those loans away to kids, many times at a rate below maybe what they should be charging, what the result is that then colleges become more and more and more. I had an example of a young person came by my office the other day. They were sort of half happy and half sad. They said, well, I finally graduated from college. I only owe $100,000. And I started to think about the salary that different people make, and by the time you get done paying taxes and giving money to your church or charities and buying some food and insurance and stuff for your cars and everything, by the time you get done, trying to save $100,000 as a young person is almost impossible. I mean, that level of debt, I don't know that many undergraduate degrees that kids are getting are worth $100,000. It's not that I'm against education. We got 6 kids, and I've gotten 5 of them. Well, 4 of them are through college. 1 of them is in the senior year, and I have 1 more to go to college. So We've been able to do it, but we've done it by trying to be very thrifty in finding deals as to how to make it affordable. But for your average undergraduate degree, if it were me, I think I'd rather have the $100,000 for my wife and I to make a down payment on a house than to have that undergraduate degree. I just don't know that they're worth that much. Better to go to a junior college somewhere and take a couple of night classes and pick it off that way. so why is it that the cost of college is going up much, much faster than other things? Well, it's because the government's trying to subsidize it. It's another place where the government needs to get its nose out of that business.
Okay, and we've got some callers, so I'd like to go ahead and let those in.
Yeah, I should have stirred things up a little bit with that, Diane.
What's that? No, well, hey, I tell you what, I just had one that just graduated and is looking at those student loans to start kicking in anytime soon, so I know what you're talking about.
Oh, yeah.
Next caller is you. Hello, you're on the air.
Yes, I was wondering how he stood on the U.S. Postal Service, the 6-day service, and the postal workers. And Claire McCaskill has been very helpful for the Postal Service and the workers, and I wonder how he stands or what he thinks he could do.
All right, thank you for your call. How about the U.S. Postal Service?
Well, I'll tell you, the Postal Service has been, they just provide great service for people. And I've had a chance to work with them a lot. Of course, being in elected office, we take big piles of letters down to the post office and everything. And the people are just always gracious. And the people who have been delivering our letter carriers have been fantastic. The details, I'm not on the committees that deal with it. The details of how does the Postal Service remain competitive and all, I'm not on the committees that do that, so I haven't really looked too closely. I don't know whether the 6th day or whatever it was of delivery or weekend delivery, I don't know if that's critical at this point, but I haven't studied it to the degree that I have a very strong opinion on the subject.
Okay, and we'll take another caller and then go into another line of questioning, and that's you. You're on the air. Hello.
Yes, I was just wondering, you're talking always along party lines, and that's really what aggravates me. I understand we have the two-party system, but I can't imagine that there's not one Democrat or two Democrats in the Senate that disagrees with the health care. I mean, just that one little thing. I mean, sending grants out all the time for beautification and all that. I understand it makes work. But I think the government lots of times brings upon themselves by shipping out grant money or giving the freeze on the Social Security for the 2%. Now they're going to turn around and say it's going to be a raise in taxes. So that's about the three items that I'll let you discuss. But, boy, I'll tell you, this voting along party lines, man, that really aggravates me. And I can't believe that you said you have your 6 children and you've got your grandkids coming up. I mean, I don't know where these grandkids are going to get the money to get this. And it's going to be not only $16 trillion, it's going to be $24 trillion before we're finished. Thank you very much. And I'll listen off the air.
And I jotted these down to make it a little bit easier for you, Todd. I think the first question, I guess, is voting along party lines, and clearly, there are a lot of really sweet deals struck when they were going down to the 11th hour with that, with the Affordable Care Act and the president and, the Cornhusker Compromise and all kinds of things. But what about the issue of voting along party lines?
Well, Diane, when I started the program, that was the way I introduced myself. I'm somebody that has not done that, okay? I voted on principle, and that's the one thing that has marked my service in government. That is, I vote on the principle of the thing. Now, to suggest that there isn't a chasm of difference between the two political parties is just naive. There is a massive difference in the mindset in Washington, D.C. between Democrats and Republicans. They're like on two different planets. And that's the case. But that doesn't mean that I vote along party lines. In fact, I don't. But I'm a conservative. I've told people that all along. And so there have been a number of very high-profile votes that I've not voted with the Republican Party. But I have almost nothing in common with the Democrats that think that the federal government has to keep spending more and more money. We're already $1 trillion over every year. And if this goes on for just a few more years, you're going to wake up some morning and the dollar bill isn't going to work, and you're going to wonder why there's no food on the shelves of the grocery store. We are very close to destroying our economy because people think that the federal government is a big sugar daddy that can keep giving stuff away to people without consequence. And we've gotten to the point where it just isn't working anymore. And that's what the problem is. The federal government is involved in things they shouldn't do anything about. we need to let the private sector solve those problems, because the private sector is much, much, much more efficient than the government is in doing some of these things. So it's the difference in the parties. You could see it in the House. The House is run by Republicans. We have, for the last 2 years, passed a budget. The Senate is run by Harry Reid and the Democrats. For over 1,000 days, they have passed no budget. Now, it's a federal law that the House and the Senate should pass a budget, but the Senate has ignored that. That's a big difference, and it's a party difference. You may not like it. You may wish there were no parties. I'm talking about the world of reality, and that's where it is. And the Democrat believes that the solution, this is what Obama and Harry Reid have been pushing, is more taxes. And I'll say, as an engineer, not as a Republican, and as a guy on the Budget Committee, you drive the taxes much farther, and you'll have even less jobs and less government revenue, because we're destroying businesses right now. And if you think you're going to have jobs without businesses, then you're envisioning life in a European or Soviet-style thing where all the jobs are government jobs. But I don't think that's what we want in America. I think we want a free country. We want a place where people can pursue the dream and can use the gifts that God gives them to do whatever constructive thing they want to do to help their neighbors and to be able to keep the things that they earn. And that's what freedom is about. And we have got massively too much government now, and America is going to have to make a decision one way or the other. And the one way is we're going to go the path of Greece into bankruptcy, and everybody's standard of living is going to go down the tubes. Or the other thing is we're going to choose freedom, and we're going to get the government out of our lives and allow the jobs to be created and people to have good living. Here's something to think about. What we consider poverty level in America is above the average standard of living in Europe. So if you're at the poverty level, you're doing better in America than the average standard of living in Europe, where the government takes over a lot of stuff. That shows the inefficiency of government doing a lot of stuff that they're trying to do.
And, you know, looking at one of the issues he brought up was Social Security, and it sounds like you've got some kids that are close in age to mine. And, you know, I'll ask them about Social Security. Do you realize how much of your check is going to Social Security? You know, what do you think about all this going on? And they say, well, you know, they never expect that they're going to get it, which amazes me, because it's like, okay, you're getting taxed for it. You're not noticing this. What can Congress do? What can the U.S. Senate do? And what would you support Todd Akin as a Republican candidate for the U.S. Senate to be able to keep Social Security solvent, not just for the people that are on it right now, but for the people that are contributing heavily into it that may not be looking at retirement for another 20 or 30 years?
Right. Well, if you think about it, mechanically, take the Social Security thing apart. What you had when FDR put it in, he got the idea from Bismarck, and what you had was you had a lot of young people working, and he said, if you get to be 65, the government will give you Social Security. Well, first of all, the average age was 62. So it was a pretty safe gamble for half the people. They'd be dead before they got there. So you had a very high percentage of people working and a very small number of people taking Social Security. Under those conditions, Social Security became a fantastic tax. The government took it and spent it all over the place and whatever they wanted to, and that's gone on for several generations now. Social Security, which you can quite honestly call it a tax, has been used to fund all sorts of different things. Now we've gotten to the point that the number of people working versus the number of people on Social Security, that ratio has changed, and Social Security is starting to cost us something. Well, no big surprise, because the average age is now 79.
Wow.
So you go from 62 to 79. That immediately suggests a partial solution, and that is Social Security, the age that it kicks in, needs to be raised. I would add to that, I just hit 65, and I don't feel like quitting working. I still feel like I got a few more miles to go here. And I'm thinking that you might also skew Social Security so as you get older, you get more. Because if you're 85, it's a whole lot harder to get a job than if, say, you're 70. And so that suggests to me that, one, Social Security should kick in when you're older, and two, maybe it should be ramped up so as you get a lot older, you get more Social Security. Those are two thoughts.
Okay, and I want to get into a couple of different issues here before we wrap up, and one is life. The life issues. You've got the contraceptive mandate, you've got legal abortion on demand, all of that. Where do you stand on the issues of life, and how does that affect your voting record in the Congress and if you were elected to the U.S. Senate? And I'm speaking with Todd Akin.
Yeah, well, I started before I was ever in political office. I was on the board of Missouri Right to Life. So I've always been a strong advocate for life. And then as I voted through the years, I have a perfect pro-life voting record. And so those are, and I'm endorsed by, Right to Life and all that. So that means I'm pro-life. But I have an extra credential, which is a little bit unusual. The largest abortion provider in America, Planned Parenthood, has put me on their Toxic 10 list. That means they think I'm one of the 10 worst people, in the political office, because of the fact that I am staunchly pro-life, and that's just one of those convictions that when you elect somebody, they should tell you honestly where they are. I believe life begins at conception. I believe that the founders were right when they drafted the Declaration of Independence. I believe that that God gives us life, and that it's the job of government to protect it. That's what the Declaration says, and I believe it starts at conception.
Okay, got about a minute left, and I want you to, a little over a minute left, I want you to give the final answer to why should voters elect you, Todd Akin, to the office of U.S. Senate in the Republican primary ballot August 7th.
Well, I'd be happy to just review that. As I gave a number of examples, I have stood on principle. That doesn't make you popular. It makes it harder to raise money. People in your party may not like you because you don't vote with the party all the time. But I have been a consistent conservative. I have the most conservative voting record of the members of Congress from our state by a number of different organizations would say I do. And that's meant that I've taken some hard votes and been willing to take the pressure, which I would not underestimate, that you get from your own party at times. And so if people want somebody with a proven record, I think a proven record beats talk and promises. Other people say, well, if I were in the Senate, I would do this or I would do this. That's talk. That's cheap. Doesn't cost you anything. But I've been there. I've had the President of the United States call me 2 times in about 8 or 10 hours asking me to change my vote. A president that I have deep respect for and very much thought of as a good brother. But I just felt like I could not change my vote because there was a principle involved and I wouldn't do it. And so if you want somebody who is somebody who stands on principle and leads with courage, then I would be your candidate for the U.S. Senate. If you want somebody that's a rubber stamp for Obama, then you want Claire McCaskill. And so I think those are going to be the choices. We're very, Claire and I vote almost the exact opposite on things. Not a personal deal. We just don't see the role of government the same way. There's one big argument that goes on in D.C., and that is, what should the government do and who's going to pay for it? That's mostly what we disagree on.
Okay.
And my position is the government should be doing a whole lot less, and I think the federal budget is Exhibit 1 in that case.
All right, well, thank you so much for giving us your time this morning. Todd Akin, Republican candidate for U.S. Senate. Website, akin.org, AKIN.org. And I thank you so much for joining us today. Best of luck with the rest of your campaign.
Well, Diane, I think people may have seen some of our ads with Mike Huckabee, so we've tried to be positive and cheerful, and we're going to try and keep that right up. Thanks,
all right,
Diane.
Thank you so much. And that was Todd Akin. He is candidate for the U.S. Senate. And right now we join ABC News. This is KLPW AM, Union, Washington.